Scout was 12 years old, gray around the muzzle, and about as threatening to look at as a rolled-up rug. Most mornings he did three things: ate, watched the ridge road, and slept in whatever patch of sun had made it onto the porch boards. I did the same three things, more or less, and I'd tell you my life was smaller for it, except that it wasn't. It was exactly the size it needed to be. I want to be clear about something before I tell you what happened on the ridge that Tuesday. Scout never did anything unusual. That's the whole point of him. He was a working border collie, bred to move stock, and he'd done that job his whole life, without complaint and without incident. The unusual part was everybody else. The farmhouse had belonged to Colonel Silas Dunmore. I'd served under him for 11 years, the last 4 of them in the Kessev salient, which most people back home never learned the name of, and most people out past the salient will never forget. Dunmore ended that war the way he did most things, quietly, and without being asked twice. When the ceasefire talks collapsed for the 9th time, he walked out into the strip between the lines with no weapon, no escort, and Scout at his heel, and he sat down in the dirt and waited. The Halvern force commander expected an assassination attempt. What he got was a man drinking cold coffee out of a thermos, and a dog lying down beside him with his chin on his paws, entirely unbothered by 4 divisions of armor, pointed at his owner's back. The war ended within the week. I was there. I still don't have a better explanation for why than the one the Halvern gave themselves. That they had never in their history seen a warrior so certain of his own strength that he required none of its trappings. They decided Dunmore's stillness was a kind of scripture. Then, because they are a thorough people, they decided everything around him was scripture too. His coffee ritual, his slow evening walks, the dog. Dunmore died 4 years ago, in his sleep, on this porch, with Scout's head resting on his knee. I inherited the farmhouse, the dog, and, though nobody asked me if I wanted it, the pilgrims. They came in modest numbers most months, robed Concord elders mostly, driving up from the transport strip in Millhaven, with offerings I didn't ask for and couldn't refuse. Without causing a diplomatic incident, nobody in Millhaven wanted to explain to the regional office. They'd sit at a respectful distance from the porch, watch Scout sleep, and leave a donation that funded, among other things, 3 refugee resettlement camps along the old salient border. I let them come because the money did real good, and because Scout never seemed to mind being watched. He'd open one eye, decide nothing interesting was happening, and go back to sleep. That Tuesday, there were more of them than I'd ever seen, and about a third of them weren't Concord at all. I heard the transports before I saw them, 6 of them, then 8, climbing the switchback road above the old Aldous quarry, which had been shut for scrap since before the war, and which the county had never gotten around to fencing properly. The Concord elders came first, in their pale robes, leading a train of pack beasts loaded with the elderly and the very young, the ones who couldn't make the climb on foot. Behind them came a second group I didn't recognize, dark-plated, tight formation, and at their front, a Halvern envoy who introduced herself as Second Magistrate Orsa Kett, of something called the Austere Circle. "We have come," she said, in the flat, over-enunciated way of someone who has practiced a speech, "to end this fraud." I asked her, politely, what fraud she meant. She meant all of it. The Concord scripture, the tribute, the pilgrimage, the dog. She'd read the histories and concluded that grieving humans, meaning me, though I'd only known Dunmore, not raised him from a pup, had invented a legend to keep the offerings flowing after the man himself was gone. She said the Austere Circle would withdraw its portion of the tribute funding, effective immediately, unless I could produce, in front of both factions, some demonstration that the dog was anything more than an old, tired animal. I told her Scout was, in fact, an old, tired animal, and that was the whole of what he'd ever claimed to be. She didn't like that answer. Neither did the Concord elders, who'd gone very still and very unhappy at the idea of losing a third of their war orphan funding to a woman who thought their god was a rug. I want you to understand the ridge road at that moment. 40-some pilgrims and skeptics packed onto a gravel switchback with a 120-foot drop on one side, a dozen pack beasts standing nose to tail in the middle of it, and every one of those people arguing in at least 2 languages about whether my dog was a miracle. Scout, for his part, was asleep on the porch step, 40 yards downhill, entirely unaware he was the subject of the meeting. What spooked the pack beasts I never did find out. A transport backfiring maybe, or just the noise of 40 people shouting past each other. What matters is that they spooked all at once, in the way herd animals do, and they went for the only open ground on that ridge, which was the gap in the fence line above the quarry. I have heard grown Halvern officers describe combat in a bored monotone. I have never heard anything from any of them like the sound that came off that ridge in the next 4 seconds. The pack train broke for the drop with 3 children and an elderly Concord matron still strapped into the transport rigging, and every single alien on that road did what aliens do best in front of me, which is scream. I said one word. I didn't shout it. Scout had heard it 10,000 times, and needed to hear it exactly once. Away. He came off the porch step at a dead run, low to the ground, ears back, and he didn't bark once. He hit the gap in the fence line at an angle I'd watched him take 100 times on 100 ordinary Tuesdays, with 100 ordinary sheep, and he cut across the lead beast's shoulder the way you'd nudge a door that was swinging the wrong way. The lead beast turned. The ones behind it turned, because the lead beast turned. Scout was already moving down the flank before the second animal had finished its stride, low and quiet and entirely unhurried, walking the whole panicked line sideways along the ridge instead of over it, the way he'd walked sheep away from the old highway culvert every spring of his working life. It took him under 10 seconds. He never showed a tooth. He never needed to. The train came to a stop 40 feet short of the drop, in a loose, confused knot, with the matron still shouting from the rigging, and the children crying, and not one of them hurt. Scout sat down in front of the lead beast, tongue out, looking extremely pleased with himself in the way dogs get after a job well done, and that was the whole of it. Nobody on that ridge said anything for a long moment. Second Magistrate Orsa Kett had her mouth still open around whatever word she'd been about to shout. She closed it slowly. That, she said finally, was not scripture. No, I agreed. That was hurting. She looked at Scout for a long time, the way you look at something you've spent considerable effort deciding wasn't real. Then she looked at the drop, and at the children, and back at the dog, who had already lost interest in the conversation, and was sniffing at a pack beast's ankle. Your colonel, she said slowly, did this, in the strip, with armor pointed at his back. He did the same thing you just watched, I told her. He just did it to a war instead of a stampede. It wasn't a miracle either time. It was a man and a dog who knew their jobs and weren't afraid to do them slow. She didn't apologize, and she didn't kneel, though 2 of the Concord elders did, quietly, without ceremony, the way you'd bow your head at a grave. The austere circle's tribute got paid in full that quarter, and the quarter after. Nobody ever asked me for another demonstration. Scout lived another 2 years after that. He's buried on the ridge, not far from the colonel, in the shade where the sun hits last. Pilgrims still come. I still don't correct them when they call it scripture, because I've come to think they're not entirely wrong. They've just got the wrong noun for it. It was never divine. It was only ever a good dog, doing exactly what he was bred and raised and loved to do, calm all the way down, right up until the moment nobody else could afford to be. I sit on that porch most evenings now, alone, and I still watch that gap in the fence line, and some nights I swear I can still hear him coming through it, low, quiet, and right on time.